Hello, this is George from George's Music Blog, and today I'm talking about Psychedelic Urban Jungle, Lee Scratch Perry, the most complex track Tom Jenkinson ever created, and the funkiest bass playing this side of Seatown. Yes, it is all here on Ultravisitor by Squarepusher. In this video, I'll give you a brief overview of Ultravisitor. I'll give you my take on it as someone who has returned to it countless times in the 20 years since it was released. Then I'll go into breakdowns of some specific tracks and finish with some final reflections. And remember, all this is just my opinion. I don't have any privileged knowledge of Squarepusher. I am just a fan who wants to share his love of the music. So, without more preamble, let's get into it. Ultravisitor was Squarepusher's 7th album and came out in 2004 on Warp Records. At 78 minutes long, it is also his longest record and brings together live instrumentation as well as the micro-edited breakbeats and experimental synthesis that had characterized his work up until that point. As with practically all Squarepusher albums, Tom Jenkinson handled every aspect of the creation himself, writing all the tracks, playing all the instruments, and producing the record himself. The album cover is a simple photo portrait of Tom Jenkinson looking straight to camera with a serious but unguarded expression on his face, which just says, "This is me," and I think invites us to consider this his most personal album to date, one that is perhaps his most comprehensive and honest execution of self-expression. To give a quick Aphex Twin comparison, someone else who was fond of sticking his face on his album covers, although I'm not saying that Ultravisitor is Squarepusher's answer to the Richard D. James album, rather, in my opinion, I see it as analogous to Drugs, both in the scope of the ambition and the depth of the artistic personality on display, and the fact that each release caps off a truly great era in the respective artist discographies. Drugs closed the book on Aphex Twin's matchless run of releases through the 1990s, and Ultravisitor closes the book on kind of the first significant era, as I see it, in Tom Jenkinson's discography, during which he'd been extremely prolific, consistent, and varied. And as a final parallel between the two albums, I believe both of them received mixed critical reception on release, although have subsequently been gone on to be regarded as works of genius by fans. Certainly this fan, anyway. Now, my take. While I wouldn't say Ultravisitor was my favourite album by Squarepusher, check out my video on Go Plastic linked below in the description for that, I would say it is his most impressive. And if it means anything to say it objectively, then his best. Detractors would argue maybe that it is bloated or self-indulgent, and I can certainly see where they're coming from. Jenkinson does indulge his wilder tendencies and experiments here, but he had more than earned the right to do so by this point in his career. So yeah, if you're looking for a concise hit of acid rave up drum and bass to chuck on and tear around the house for half an hour, go and check out Big Loader. Ultravisitor is a realm where Tom is master and we play by his rules. He truly lets his ideas sprawl out and no stone is left unturned in his quest of musical discovery. Pick your metaphor of choice there. There is some truly mind-bending and unique music here, and at the end of the record you really feel like you've been through something. For the same reasons, Ultravisitor can be a tiring listen and is definitely not one I would recommend as an entry point to Squarepusher, its self-indulgence making it somewhat impenetrable to the uninitiated. Now, Tom Jenkinson had recorded plenty of tracks using live instruments before and no sequences, even a whole album in the shape of Music is Rotted One Note, and he'd incorporated live playing into his electronic compositions since the very start. But Ultravisitor feels like an attempt to synthesize these two elements in a way that goes above and beyond what he'd attempted before. To help with this, he employs the conceit of adding in crowd noise at various points across the record, which, while not exactly giving it the feel of a live album, does help you conceptualize it more as a continuous experience. A fantastical, great gig in the sky where Tom has access to banks of gear, sequencers, mixing desk, and every instrument he's ever played, and the ability to somehow be everywhere all at once and play them all simultaneously. So without further ado, let's get into the details of these specific tracks, and where better to begin with the title track and opening track, Ultravisitor, which opens proceedings with exactly the kind of sound I had wanted to follow up Go Plastic. Rather than the misfiring experiments of Do You Know Squarepusher, this feels like a true evolution of that sound, with a frenetic, rushing bass line and breakbeats bursting and collapsing like miniature fireworks. It sounds futuristic, urban and psychedelic all at the same time. And we also see a return to the kind of nostalgic, suburban is what I would call it, melodic character that featured on his early records. In fact, the melodic refrain on Ultravisitor almost sounds like a reprise of the line from theme from Ernest Borgnine, one of his very early tracks, but here digitized and fragmented, whereas the line on Borgnine seemed to herald rays of sun appearing over the horizon. Here they are transformed into rivulets of liquid gold. Jenkinson doesn't maintain that speedy energy for long, and soon the breaks are deconstructed literally before our ears into a cacophonous wall of reverb drum hits, which creates this sense of a huge space in which the piece reaches its triumphant climax like a resplendent sunrise. Later on the album, District Line 2 is the yin to Ultravisitor's yang, a darker dystopian journey into a post-urban dreamscape where all that remains of humanity are broadcast from long-dead pirate radio stations. The chopped and reassembled breakbeats are the clearest through line back to Go Plastic, but here they feel more untethered from their origins in urban music and pressed into the service of a more hallucinatory landscape. The short sample from Welcome to Blackboard by The Upsetters, a Jamaican dub band that worked with Lee Scratch Perry, is put to devastating effect over the course of several minutes and adds a very menacing dimension to the track. Towards the end, the piece pixelates and merges from jungle into murky jazz fusion, and when it reassembles, somehow everything is upside down with live bass guitar playing off against topsy-turvy breaks. Like much of Ultravisitor, it has to be heard to be believed. 50 Cycles is another chunky track, pushing 8 minutes, and expands on the ideas from F Train on Do You Know Squarepusher. Tom's heavily treated and processed voice recites snatches from what could be a textbook or the first draft of a dystopian sci-fi novel. It's a piece of two halves. In the first, the mix is absolutely saturated with micro-edited glitches and wild pings in dynamic range, and the fragments of Tom's voice are harder to make out than they are on F Train. Things loosen up in the final third with an increase in tempo and the introduction of an acid bass line, and it sounds like the bass and the beats are physically popping out of the speakers. I've heard Tom state in an interview that 50 Cycles was one of the most complex and difficult tracks he's ever created, and you can certainly hear it in the sheer density of sound to the point where it's almost painful to listen to. And it is certainly a disorientating track, even by Squarepusher standards. So yeah, while the sound design and manipulation of the soundstage are undeniably impressive, it can be quite a difficult listen, and it's definitely not one of my favourite tracks on the album. Following that is Menelec, which is probably the closest thing on Ultravisitor to straight up drum and bass, having a bit of a sort of dark tech step vibe. But pretty quickly the beats build in intensity and we get treated to that kind of squeezing, squashing effect that Tom Jenkinson seems to love, where it sounds like the breaks themselves are being physically crushed. Here it has the effect of making the beats sound like they are being hurled faster and faster around a shrinking space, like electrons in a particle accelerator. Then, sitting at the heart of Ultravisitor, like a malevolent storm, is Steinbolt, which is unusual in the Pusher canon for having something of a heavy metal vibe. Don't get me wrong, you're not going to mistake it for a heavy metal track, although it does take the sound of what could be a power chord, which is then shredded to absolute fuck, and combined with percussion that sounds like heavy metal literally being pummeled into oblivion. I'm aware I might be making all of this sound deeply unappealing or unapproachable, and yeah, there's no denying some of these tracks are brutal and uncompromising. But even Steinbolt has a harmonic component and is not an exercise in pure endurance. All that carnage and fury does feel as though it's in the service of something meaningful as the track reaches its almighty resolution at the climax. But it is my favourite track, which is the one that merges the live sound with the electronic in a way that is dazzling even by Jenkinson standards, and that is Tetra-sync. I've talked in previous videos about how Squarepusher has two main melodic styles, the suburban and the cosmic, and Tetra-sync is very much in the cosmic category. Sticking your 9.5 minute magnum opus 13th down the running order on an 80-minute album is a pretty surefire way that anyone who felt this album was a little bit too out there had long ago switched off by this point. To be honest, I don't even know if it's worth me trying to describe this track because the word epic gets thrown around far too much. So yeah, if I say it is an epic journey, showcasing some of Tom Jenkinson's most impressive bass playing and synthesis of live elements with sequenced elements, and a higher density of what the fuck moments than almost any other track I can think of, that doesn't really do it justice. Just go away and listen to it after you finish watching this video. Two other pieces that consist more fully of live instruments are Iambic 9 Poetry and Circlewave, which bookend the album. The former is a high point in the first third of the record and builds on the melodic approach to jazz fusion that Jenkinson took on the track My Sound off of Music is Rotted One Note, as well as the track Iambic 5 Poetry on Budokan Mindphone. Iambic 9 Poetry, in my opinion, is better than either of those tracks and just exists in its own world, really. The fluttering rhythm and washes of guitar are unashamedly lovely, but like all the best music, there is a melancholic undercurrent too. And although it is a very emotive track, it's never kind of impinged on me to the extent that I ascribe a particular feeling to it. And again, despite the fact I've listened to it countless times over many, many years, I don't have it associated with any particular memories. It just seems to float free in my mind, much like the music itself floats free. Circlewave, on the other hand, is much more circumspect and has an almost post-rock feeling about it in the mournful guitars and gradual building and release of tension. It's definitely an autumnal track, coming as it does in the final stages of the album, definitely a kind of twilight vibe about it, and you can certainly imagine it soundtracking the closing scenes in a film. Again, really lovely stuff there. And finally, littered throughout Ultravisitor are various bridging passages and interludes, some consisting solely of classical guitar, such as Andre, Tomib Help Bus, and Everyday I Love, which are all pleasant enough and serve as oral palate cleansers in between the more abrasive material. I Fulcrum is literally a fulcrum between the title track and Iambic 9 Poetry. It features a sequence of notes that crop up again and again throughout the record, it seems to me anyway, which helps add to that sense of it being a continuous performance. And then a final quick shout out to Seatown Smash, which is just over a minute of Tom showing off his chops on the bass guitar and is a rare moment of uncomplicated joy on what can be quite a draining record. So, final reflections. Ultravisitor is home to some of Tom Jenkinson's most challenging but also his most impressive and rewarding music. I don't know if he would agree with this himself, but it feels like the culmination of a particular stage in his development as an artist. The logical conclusion of various ideas and themes that he had been exploring and building upon over the course of several albums. Namely, his fascination with and deconstruction of urban genres such as drum and bass, jungle and UK garage, as well as his experiments with jazz fusion. The sleeve notes contain what appear to be cuttings from notebooks he used in the creation of Ultravisitor. You can see a few examples here. Their inclusion seems to be an attempt to impress upon the listener just what a labour of love this album was, as if to say, look, this nearly broke me. Contrast that with the bright colours and iconographic imagery of the follow-up, Hello Everything. So yeah, a colossus of a record. I'm not even sure it gets the broader recognition it deserves compared to some of his better known albums. It is surely held in the highest regard by his fans, and it certainly made a deep impression on me when I first heard it as an 18-year-old, opening up new avenues of mental exploration and taking me to some pretty far out places. Okay, that's pretty much everything from me on Ultravisitor. Do you agree or disagree? I would love to hear from you. Please let me know in the comments below. Also, if you're still watching the video at this point, please give it a like and check out my channel for more of the same. Otherwise, until next time, goodbye.